Okay, the Mexican-American War. Here's a great map that shows you all the main generals, all the big battles, the general theaters of action, and etc. Let's start at the top and work our way down by talking about John C. Fremont and the conquest of California. Fremont is going to... It's a long story. I'm not going to get into this. You can Google him if you want to. Fremont had a small army, not of trained professional soldiers, of frontiersmen, basically, a few hundred guys in Oregon. And at the time that the war was announced, he found out by telegraph. So he heads south towards San Francisco, okay? And, well, first to Sacramento. And he shows up in Sacramento, tells them that the war's on, tells the governor, Pico Boulevard here in LA, named after him. He says, yeah, look, I'm in charge now, and I'm going to let everybody else in California know. And Pico says, amigo, Senor General, whatever you say, okay? And so they head down to San Francisco. San Francisco doesn't fire a shot. They don't raise a fist. They don't yell at him. They don't do anything to defy this invading army. I mean, it's an army invading their city, invading their part of the country. They're part of Mexico. And they just roll over. Now, this should not come as a big surprise to us because we know that San Franciscans are nothing but a bunch of giant-loving, Golden Gate Bridge painting, one-way street driving, trolley car riding, rice-a-roni eating, panhandler supporting, hippie-loving, no-good cheese-eating surrender monkeys. They're no better than the French. They just give up. They just gave up. They surrendered. And then Fremont marched down to Monterey. And they surrendered too. They can be forgiven more than San Francisco because in San Francisco there was a lot more guys, a lot more men. They really could have fought back, but they didn't. And then they surrendered in San Luis Obispo, which was really small, and in Santa Barbara. Everybody just surrendered. They said, "Don't shoot, don't kill us, please." They all just surrendered. They were weak. They didn't fight for California. They didn't stand up for California. But then Fremont got to Los Angeles. And he found out that Los Angeles was something else. That Angelenos were badasses. I'm a native Angeleno. Are there any native Angelenos in there? And by native Angeleno, I mean, were you born and raised within 30 or 40 miles of downtown LA? Even Orange County. Those bunch of weasels out there, they're weasels too, right? The Los Angeles... What do they call that? Their team now? The Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. And they're in Orange County. Los Angeles County. Hello? Makes no sense. There's only one Los Angeles baseball team, and that's the Dodgers. But the whole urban sprawl is kind of LA, right? On the bottom line, and the natives know this. You guys know what I'm talking about. Angelenos are badasses, okay? If you're from some other city, anywhere in the world, I'm sorry, okay? But I'm telling you about Angelenos. We're badasses. All right. Fremont learned this at the first Battle of Los Angeles, which is called the Battle of the Dominguez Hills. At this battle, which took place at Rancho Dominguez up in here. In fact, it took place right where IKEA is. Angelenos know what I'm talking about. IKEA, right at the 405 there in Carson, right? You get off at Avalon. They have those Swedish meatballs that are really groovy, right? That's the Carson Mall. When they built the Carson Mall in the 1970s, and they had to dig down like 50 feet to excavate for the big box stores like Sears and, Best Buy kind of stores, or IKEA for that matter, where they have underground areas that big trucks can drive down into where the loading docks are, right? When they excavated all that, they found lots of artifacts from the Battle of the Dominguez Hills, man. I mean, it happened like right there. Sometimes when I'm at IKEA, when my wife makes me go and I'm walking through that thing like a mouse in a maze, I listen really hard. I try to, over that voice, there's that guy talking to you like on the People Mover at Disneyland. Welcome to the store of tomorrow, IKEA. It's totally annoying, right? But I listen. I try to hear the ghosts of the Battle of the Dominguez Hills. I haven't heard them yet, but maybe someday. Anyway, at this battle, for the first time, not only did Vermont's army have to fight, but they got their asses kicked. Asses kicked. And by who? me and you, just people, Angelinos, man, with machetes in their hand, man, and axes and tree branches, and some of them had guns, but not very many, and just people. We stood up. Angelinos stood up for Los Angeles and for California, and by extension, for all of Mother Mexico, right? And we kicked their asses so bad that Fremont and his guys ran all the way back down through Carson, all the way through San Pedro, way up into the Palos Verdes, man, in the hills of the peninsula, because they didn't know what the hell else to do, okay? They took all their dead and they buried them out here on what was called Isla del Muerto, the island of the dead men. It doesn't exist anymore, it's gone, but it used to be out in San Pedro Harbor. They demolished it back in the 1940s. 1940s. But anyway, so they got scared. Now, but they lucked out. When they were up there in the hills, oh no, I have the map here, I'm sorry. When they were up here in the hills, they saw a naval fleet under the command of Admiral Sloat, okay, which was coming up around Mexico like so. They've got the line like this, like the Navy was like 300 miles out to sea, but that's just so that the line doesn't interfere with the writing here. In fact, the Navy, not the whole Navy, but a small part of the Navy was heading along the coast trying to figure out what, they should get involved in or whatever. And with a spy scope, Fremont's guys saw the Navy. They said, holy cow, it's the Navy. They built a fire. They did SOS smoke signals, right? Please help us. Tough Mexicans. Gonna kill us all, right? So the Navy guys came in. They reinforced them. Bigger army now. Professional military personnel. Then you had the Second Battle of Los Angeles, round 2. This battle was known as the, the Battle of the Cahuenga Pass. It was fought right where the Hollywood Freeway, the 101 is today. This is the 101 northbound. Just came out of Hollywood, past the Capitol Records building. Now you're getting off to go to Universal Studios, right? When they built this off-ramp and the other one that's a little further down, they found artifacts from this battle. That's how we know that that's exactly where the battle went down. And this is just for Angelinos, you've all gone to Universal City Walk at some point or another, or the Universal Studios or whatever, right? Here you are on the 101, right? You get off on Lankershim, you turn right, and then if you're going up into the studios and whatever, you turn right up Universal Hollywood Drive, and this is where the big parking structure is up here, and blah, 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 right? Right across the street from where you turn up is a Metrolink station and a big parking lot, right? Subway, okay? And right next to that is the Campo de Cahuenga. It's a little museum. It is the site where the Treaty of Cahuenga was signed, which is where California was surrendered to General John C. Fremont by General Andres Pico, the brother of the governor of California, okay? January of 1847. See, you never even knew it was there, right? But this is it. This is a painting of it. Now it looks a little different, obviously, because it's about 150 years later. But anyway, you get the general idea. Okay, now, there was a little other action in California, very minor, down in San Diego. We're not even going to talk about that. It's not important enough for our purposes. We can't talk about everything. Okay, now, okay, I told you that Polk all along had a plan. If I become president one way or another, I'm going to get California. Tried to buy it, didn't work. Plan B, going to go to war. Now, I'm going to start a war to get California, but once I've got the war, what would I like to have happen as quickly as possible? End the war. Beat Mexico. Show them that they're going to be beaten badly enough that they agree to give up California, and then the war is over. In other words, they just don't want the war to drag on and on. Wars cost money. Wars cost lives. War sucks. Okay, so I got it. I don't want it to last forever. What do? So he's talking to his advisors in Washington. And one of these advisors says, you know, Mr. President, there's one guy that always just seems to take control of Mexico, take control of the government. Like whenever he wants to, he wraps the whole country around his little finger and does whatever he wants to. They're talking about Santa Anna, our old pal from the Alamo, Texas. You remember, right? Guys, it's 1846 now. Santa Anna has been running around the historical stage of Mexico for about almost 20 years at this point. During this time, Santa Anna has been the president and or the dictator of Mexico like 8 different times. Sometimes for the conservatives, sometimes for the liberals. Sometimes he gets elected, sometimes he just takes over the government. Sometimes he gets bored and he just quits the job and leaves. He's mercurial. He's unpredictable. He's the only human being that ever lived that in some ways is like Bugs Bunny. And what I mean by that is that he could do anything, it seems like. When you read the stories about Santa Anna, trust me, I could sit here and talk to you for 4 or 5 hours about Santa Anna, and every story I tell you is more preposterous than the last one. You go, this can't be true. They're all true. Well, here's the latest story. Santa Anna had been sent into exile by the government of Mexico. He is living in Cuba and Havana. The United States State Department finds out where he is. The president sends a delegation, 3 guys, to go down and make Santa Anna an offer. So they arrive in Havana. They send a message to him. He asks them to come up and have dinner at his villa overlooking the harbor. They go up, they talk, they rub elbows, right? They smoke cigarillos, they drink cervezas and fine wine, they have dinner, and not until way after dinner, when they're out on the balcony looking at the moonlight on the waters of the Caribbean, does Santa Anna finally turn to them and say, so, amigos, you have not come all the way down to Cuba just to hear the stories of an old war horse. Surely you are here for some important purpose. They say, well, yeah, okay, well, here's the deal. And so they tell him, look, you know, maybe you've heard about it. We got this war going with Mexico. We really want to get it over with, and we really just want to get California out of it. We're even willing to pay for California at the end of the war. You know, just here's what we want to do. You know, we want to get this thing over quick, and we thought maybe you might be able to do something. And he says, so, let me see if I understand you correctly. You want me to return to Veracruz, to my home. This is where Santa Anna's from. He's got a lot of support there, a lot of guys, right? To raise an army, to march that army into Mexico City, to overthrow the government of President Valentin Gomez Farias, to seize control of the government and bring a swift end to the war so that we may negotiate a treaty which will allow for the sale of California to you in return for some sum of money. Am I understanding you correctly? You wish me to betray the land of my father? Is this what you're asking me to do? Now they feel weird, right? Because he's making them feel weird. They say, well, you know, kind of. Yeah, it's, you know, yeah, right, the size of it. He says, you know that this would cost a great deal of money. And they say, well, you know, we kind of figured. And he says, how much money were you thinking of offering me? And they say, well, how much do you want? And Santa Anna says, how much do you have? And they pat this, they got this like leather bag. Say, we have 25,000, no, 30, I think it was $30,000. $30,000, something like that. We have $30,000. Santa Anna says, just the amount that I was thinking. And so this is what they do. They pay Santa Anna the money. And what does he do? He goes to Veracruz, but not until he has spent all the money on as many guns and as much ammunition as he can lay his hands on. He raises an army in Veracruz. He marches to Mexico City and overthrows the government and sends President Gomez Farias into exile to New Orleans. Then he whips together a much bigger army than he's already got. He arms them with everything that he's bought. They get going as fast as they can north, and they end up traveling north, okay, him and his army, and they become the primary resistance force for the American armies under Zachary Taylor, that comes like so, and under Tom Donovan, that comes like so, up here in northern Mexico. There's a couple of major battles up here, like really big dramatic battles. Okay, that's these big, okay, but there's a lot of smaller battles as well. The entire process in the north is Santa Anna fighting larger armies, better armed, slowing the advance of those armies, but slowly and surely being driven back to the south and ultimately all the way back to Mexico City. Now, and the most interesting of those battles, the Battle of... that came later. Oh yeah, it's later. Okay. Sorry, I'll get to that in a minute. Okay. Now, further south, we have the movements of Winfield Scott. Here he is. He had a nickname too, Old Fuss and Feathers, because he was a very formal and by-the-book military guy, and he really liked wearing his uniform like every day of the week. And so the basic, soldiers say, oh, he's all fuss and feathers, man, all caught up with himself, whatever. But he was a terrific general. He was the greatest general in American history between George Washington and the Civil War. Greater than Andrew Jackson, was in the Army more than 50 years, 50. And he was the first, not one-star general, not two-star general, but the first three-star generals at a time when you could only get 3 stars. Okay, so he was good stuff. Winfield Scott was a terrific general. Now, what he does is he comes with an enormous army transported by the Navy, okay? And they ultimately arrive at Veracruz. And the Army gets out, and the Navy goes back up north, and they bring more guys. And ultimately, Scott takes months, okay, to build up an enormous, giant army at Veracruz, all right? And when it's finally big enough, that's when, look up here, he marches into the interior. There's a lot of fighting at Veracruz, and then at Jalapa, and there's a lot of smaller battles and minor stuff in between. This is the same route, if it's of interest to you, that Cortez took when he and the Spanish conquistadors went into the interior to try to conquer the Aztec Empire. Ultimately, Winfield Scott takes that same road all the way up into Mexico City, where they fight 3 tremendous battles at Chapultepec, at Molina del Rey, and at Contreras. Okay, now, when Scott is approaching Mexico City, at the same time, Zachary Taylor, combined with Donovan, their 2 armies have formed one giant army. They're chasing Santa Anna south. He's days and days ahead of them, but basically Mexico City is going to be caught between like the claws of a pincher. A giant American army coming from the east, a giant American army coming from the north. I'll tell you this later if I have time, so I'm going to skip it for a minute. Okay. Ultimately, there's this one last great battle, okay, the kind of final battle at Chapultepec, which is a big hill. If you go to Mexico City today, they have a giant park like Central Park or Golden Gate Park or Griffith Park. In the middle of the city, it's called Chapultepec Park, or it's actually Chapultepec, but most people say Chapultepec. And up on top of this big hill in the middle of the park is this museum. Well, once upon a time, that museum was a military academy. Okay, it had originally been a castle in the colonial era. Then it was turned into a military academy to train young men to become officers, not just regular soldiers, but the sons of wealthy and prominent men to become officers in the military, right? So because it was originally a castle and was built like kind of like a fortress, it was a place that you could defend out of, that an army could get inside of and fight an army that was trying to attack it, right? So the last big battle was here as the American military kind of went up Chapultepec and assaulted the Mexican forces inside. This is George Wilkins Kendall, actually, who was a war correspondent that he was a guy who was actually in the military, but he covered the war and sent like 2,000 or something like that press releases, basically, back to the United States, like through a series of ships. He had it all worked out, crazy thing. Giving like a kind of day-to-day account of what it was like to travel with the army and like win the war and whatever. Interesting guy. Anyway, there he is. This is one of his famous paintings. He was a painter, he was a soldier, he was a writer, he was a very interesting character. Anyway, if you look at this part down here, of Chapultepec. It's more accurately this part right here. Okay, not properly remembered by Kendall when he did the painting, but anyway, what happened was when the American soldiers were overthrowing, finally, like when it was clear that the jig was up and they were coming in from every side and so on and so forth, there were these 6 cadets, young guys, that ended up climbing up on top of this highest spot in the castle and like shooting and firing from up there, right? And basically, you know, like they're going to fight to the last bullet. One of them, a young man named Juanescutia, he tore down the Mexican flag and wrapping himself in it, rather than allowing himself to be shot by the American troops, he jumped off and fell to his death down here on this other side. It's like 100 feet. Anyway, all 6 of these young guys did this. They martyred themselves, but he wrapped himself on the flag. Okay, when you go to Chapultepec Palace today, and you walk into the big entryway area, there are these big staircases that go up and around, and you look up and there's this big rotunda, and inside of that, this mural is painted of Juanescutia and the Mexican eagle up here, right? Like this kind of like spiritual visitation of the Mexican eagle, strength, bravery, right? Here he is wrapped in the flag, throwing himself down to his death, and all these kind of spectral figures of war, soldiers and horses and ramparts and destruction, right? Very powerful stuff. Almost any town, and definitely in every city in Mexico, there is a Los Niños Heroes Boulevard, or Boulevard de los Niños Heroes, and Avenida de los Niños Heroes, the boy heroes, these 6 kids that killed themselves. There's a portrait of Juanescutia. Here's a tile mosaic of Juanescutia. And in 1848, President Harry Truman became the first American president to make a goodwill trip to Mexico. Went to Mexico City, met the president, did all the stuff right. Ahead of time, he tells his staff, his people, he says, look, I want to go and I want to put a wreath of flowers at the monument to Los Niños Heroes. And they all go, who? Oh, what do you... Truman was probably second only to Thomas Jefferson in terms of his knowledge of history. And so he told them the whole story of what happened with Los Niños Heroes and etc. And he said, look, that was an illegal war. I mean, obviously it turned out great for us, but we invaded Mexico and etc. and so on. And those kids, I think it would do a great thing for the relationship between America and the United States if I were to pay tribute to those boys. They all told him, you can't do this, Mr. President. It's terrible. You're going to lose votes. You're going to, in the next election, everybody's going to think you're a traitor. You can't apologize for America having won a war. Maybe you guys remember, you know, President Obama getting yelled at for trying to talk realistically about events from the past. You know, it's not apologizing for the war. It's just saying, hey, these kids were brave. They died for their country, right? This is a monument to Los Niños Heroes. Here you have Mexico, right? It's like a woman, the motherland, you know, like holding Juanescutia, and the other 5 boys are back around the side here. And then there's the names of some other guys, Irishmen, Irlandeses, okay? The San Patricios that died for Mexico. I'll tell you about that more in a minute, right? With gratitude of Mexico, okay, for your sacrifice. I'll tell you about that more in a minute. Anyway, Truman goes here. He has this wreath placed here. He gives a little talk about Los Niños Heroes. And he was exactly right. Nobody in the United States got bothered about it. Everybody thought it was a class thing to do, honoring these brave teenage kids from 100 years ago. It was right on, totally right on the money. 100th anniversary of the end of the war. Perfect. Truman knew what he was doing. He always knew what he was doing. Okay. Well, anyway. The war comes to an end in April 1848, and a treaty is negotiated. That treaty is called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. There are 3 things about the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that I want you to know. Okay? The first thing is that the United States is going to get an enormous amount of territory from Mexico. right? A lot of land is going to change hands. Okay? So that's first thing. Second thing, the treaty says that any Mexican living in what is now American territory, in other words, all the land that we're going to get from Mexico, if you're a Mexican living in that territory, you're going to be an American citizen with all rights before the law, the protection of the Constitution. You are going to be, automatically grandfathered into the United States. You're going to be a citizen of our country. If you choose to leave, we understand, but look, we want you to stay and you'll be a citizen. Great. Okay? The third thing is any Mexican living in what is now American territory that owns any kind of property. I don't mean a pen or a pencil. I mean property that generates money. Herds of livestock, farms, ranches, buildings, okay, sailing vessels, right? Your property is going to be protected under American law. You're American citizens. Your property will be protected just like any American's property is protected. And believe me, Americans love property, and we know how to protect it, man. So look, these are the guarantees. Great. Okay, now, the question is, what really happened as a result of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo? Okay, number one, did we get a lot of territory from Mexico? You bet. Okay, look at all this grain, guys. All this grain is what we got because of the Mexican-American War. We started out just trying to get California. We got Nevada. We got Utah. We got a chunk of Wyoming. We got about 2/3 of Colorado. We got Arizona. We got New Mexico. We got another big chunk of what becomes Texas. Little piece of Oklahoma. And one corner of Kansas. Look at all that land, guys. And then enlarge your looking. Look at it from 1836, when this chunk of what becomes Texas was ripped off from Mexico. And then this, 1848. And then this, 5 years later in 1853, the Gadsden Purchase. When you put it all together into square miles, this is more than half of what used to be Mexico. Imagine what Mexico might be like today in the year 2016 if she had kept all of that land. Imagine what we'd be like if we didn't have it. Look at that, guys. Look at every one of those states. How many people are there in every one of those states that are going to get up tomorrow and go to work and generate income and create and build and farm and dig and process and manufacture and provide and serve and etc. Guys, think of the wealth that we have pulled out of that in the last 66 years. It's unbelievable. Could Mexico have made proper use of it? Probably not, because they didn't have the capital to invest in it. But still, what if? Back in 1842, the president of Mexico, President Camacho, said, "Poor Mexico, so close to the United States and so far from God." Right? Meaning, Mexico's life has been difficult because we are next door neighbors with the Americans. If God lived next door, lived a little closer by, maybe things would have worked out differently. But okay. So, did the first part of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo pay off? Did we get all that land? You bet we got all that land. And very quickly you might be wondering, hey, what's up with this Gadsden Purchase? Well, we got all that land, and we wasted no time sending people west to try to figure out the best ways to run the railroads across the west, right? The best way to run a railroad out of this part of Texas to get to San Diego was to go through here. Now, you might say, why not up here, Dave, in the land that we already own? Because there were too many scary Apaches up here. But 100 years ago, the Spanish had established a very strong fortified location. It's called Tucson, Arizona, right down here, Tucson, big fort there. And we thought, boy, it'd be so cool if we could just run the railroad through Tucson, but that's Mexican territory. So, a senator by the name of Gadsden negotiated with the Mexican government, and we purchased this real estate off of them for a big pile of money. Now, you can imagine the Mexican government talking amongst themselves, should we sell the Americans that piece of land? Well, they're just going to take it, right? I mean, what have we learned already in the last 20 years? Why don't we take the money now? Yeah, you're right. And avoid all the hassle. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, okay, right? So in 1853, the Gadsden Purchase was negotiated. So yeah, boy, did we get a pile of Mexican land. Now, second thing, did Mexicans now living in territory soon to become states belonging to the United States, did they become American citizens with all protections under the law and the Constitution? No. No. Okay? No, they didn't. They were treated like second, more like third-class citizens. They were abused, ripped off, denigrated. Not every story is a horror story, but most of them are pretty bad. Not every Mexican was abused, but most of them were to some degree or another. That's a longer story than we have time to tell right now, but that didn't really work out too well. The third part. What about all their property? Did they get to keep it, Dave? Gosh, gee, will you tell us, did they? No. For the most part, by 1900, okay, 1848, within about a half century, by 1900, the overwhelming majority of Mexicans that owned land, ranches, real estate, farms, or houses, okay, the overwhelming majority of Mexicans that owned land in the Southwest, by 1900, they'd lost all or most of it. Okay. Here is a picture of John Slidell. Remember the diplomat that Polk sent down to Mexico to negotiate? Yeah, Slidell was still there, and he was the guy that negotiated the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Now, it got to be late one night, and he was trying his best to get Baja California. Okay? And they kept going back and forth and around and around and around. And then the Mexicans, the story goes, they started getting him to drink tequila. And he drank tequila, and he drank tequila, and he drank tequila. And ultimately, they got him to sign off on everything. And the next day, it's like he didn't remember. I don't know if this is a true story or not. But the bottom line is Mexico was able to keep Baja. And there's been a lot of minerals there. A lot of wealth came out of Baja California over the last 160 years or whatever it is. So, que bueno for Mexico, right? And that's one little piece of real estate that we did actually lose out on. Now, how did the Mexican people feel about the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo? It's the law, man, but boy, it sucked. The farmers, the campesinos, the people, they said, you got to be kidding me. This is the worst thing. But the soldiers, the politicians, they were in charge, right? There was nothing that the people could do about this. The Mexican people, the little people, they said Mexico was plucked. Mexico was plucked. Here was the eagle of Mexico, the proud eagle on the prickly pear cactus. It's on their flag, in the middle of the flag. Okay, before the war, but after the war, like a plucked chicken or something. Terrible what was done to us, what was done to our country. Here's a map of California that shows the land grants made by the Spanish government. In other words, land that was given to Spaniards, okay, in the colonial era. Now, you can see some of this land right in here. It's a little hard to make out some of the colors sometimes exactly where like this becomes that. Pueblo lands are lands that belong to the Indians, Indian communities, pueblos, okay? Then, under an independent Mexican government between 22 and 9, 30 and 34, 35 and 39, 40 and 44, 45, right up until 1846, they were giving away land grants, right? Red, orangey, yellow. You can see the schematic here. You guys get it. You see what I'm saying? This is just that made larger. Okay? Now, to give you a better sense of this, here you have the San Francisco Bay Area, right? San Francisco's right here. Here's the peninsula we talked about. You can see the Spanish and Mexican lands claimed. These are land grants, okay? One guy got this. One guy got that. Some guys got something smaller like that. But that's bigger than, you know, that's as big as LA or something, okay? So, anyway, here we are, up until the war, right? Now, here we have Los Angeles, Okay, the greater LA sprawl. Now, to try to orient you, for those of you that are from Southern California, Palos Verdes, San Pedro, Long Beach, the South Bay cities, LAX, the college, West LA College right around here, Santa Monica, Malibu, right? The Malibu Mountains, Santa Monica Mountains, I mean, and the Hollywood Hills go through like this. The 110 freeway goes up like this. Downtown is right about here, downtown LA, all right? So the 10 freeway cross like this. Okay, so once again, Pueblo lands, Indian lands, right there. Land grants, land grants, land grants, land grants. So you can see how this was worked out in the greater LA, Southern California sprawl, like north of Orange County, okay? Another map, I'm not going to get way into this. You can pause and look at it if you want to and read the titles. It's kind of interesting to see what different areas of LA were called, you know, back at that time. Same thing, even closer up on down on the South Bay Ridge. You can see the Rancho San Pedro, right? Nowadays, this is San Pedro, Harbor City, Wilmington, Carson, Compton, part of Gardena, Torrance. I mean, tremendous land grant that this guy got, right? Okay. All of this, from the American point of view, was groovy, great, spectacular. I mean, it was like win-win, right? This was proof to most Americans that manifest destiny was a for real thing, that Americans were destined to progress into the West under a rising sun, right? And here you have the figure of destiny hovering over these wagon trains, farmers, explorers, right? Guys with their oxen and the covered wagons, the railroad coming. I mean, this is it's as clear as the nose on your face that this was always meant to be. Here in the background, see San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge and everything. It's a weird thing geographically. Like, this is supposed to be west, but that's San Francisco. Whatever. It's the idea that matters more than anything else. Now, to me, the great irony of all of this is that over the last 150, 60 years, slowly but surely, Mexico has been taking the Southwest back, right? 1 year at a time, slowly but surely, the southwestern part of the United States is becoming a northern extension of Mexico. It's going back to what it was originally. It's like a cosmic injustice is being turned back, that the clock turned backwards. Here's a great great political cartoon. Welcome to the United States of America, U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Now, northern occupied Mexico. Nuevo Austin, Nuevo Dallas, Nuevo Houston. Now leaving southern Mexico, right? Clever. Cute. You know, the demographic studies tell us that by 2054, the United States will be a Latino-dominant nation. More than 50% of all of Americans will be of Latino ancestry. And by 2100, the entire Western Hemisphere, or pardon me, all of North America, from Mexico through the U.S. into Canada, will be dominant Latino ancestry. Nothing wrong with that. I like Latinos. I'm married to a Mexican. I got no problem with it. And the fact that I'm married to a Mexican leads to this. When I was telling my wife that I was putting this together, she goes, oh, let me give you some things. Here's some funny political cartoons, or not political, pardon me, just cartoons. If you know anything about Mexicans, as a people, their history has been so hard and so rough and so bitter, so difficult, so violent, so bloody, and so just, there's been so much bad luck. They've had to develop a very thick skin and a very great kind of tough sense of humor. So for Mexicans, you can make fun of anything. You can make jokes about anything. It doesn't matter. So here you've got Juanescutia, right? You know, parachuting off of Chapultepec with his flag, you know, and this girl diving off is Juanescutia, El Angry Birds Mexicano, right? It's like an Angry Birds game, but Juanescutia. And then over here you've got Yo en el amor soy como Juanescutia, siempre me aviento a lo pendejo, which basically means, in love, I am like Juanescutia. I always throw myself in with no reason, like an asshole. right? Like, when I'm in love, I just jump. I just go for it, right? And here's one more. Es un pájaro. Es un avión. No, es Juanescutia. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's Superman. No, it's Juanescutia, right? Now, I had my presentation a little tweak, guys. You can, if you want to, you can bail out right now. I'm going to go about 2 more minutes. I really want to go back to something, though, that I had the wrong spot. And I apologize. I don't really know how that happened, but it did. Okay. There were a lot of American soldiers who were recent Irish immigrants. They came from New York down to fight in Mexico, okay? And they formed like a specific brigade of troops. They called themselves the St. Patrick's Battalion, okay? So here were these Irish Catholics that came down to fight. I'm going to fight for my new country, make a great amount of money. I send me money home to mama, and I'm gonna go off and gonna be a patriot. Gonna go off and show everybody what I can do. Young guys, they want to be tough and fight, and they don't think they're gonna die. So all these young Irish guys joined up, and off they go to Mexico. Now, the majority of American soldiers in Mexico were Army personnel. And the majority of the Army at that time in history and now, when I say majority, I don't mean 90%, but I mean more than half of the Army, they're Southerners. Southerners in the 1840s came from a society where dark-skinned people, almost all of them, were slaves. And you could abuse dark-skinned people, white people were superior to them, right? You guys understand the dynamic here. I don't need to get too far into this. So how do you think these Southerners in Mexico behaved towards the Mexicans? Well, they saw them as a mongrelized race, part Indian, part black, part Spaniard. I don't even know what else they are. Just a mixed-up, mongrelized race. And they didn't have any respect for them. They disdained them. They looked down upon them. Some of them used them for target practice, literally. Like soldiers would take pot shots at civilians, people just walking a block away. Hey, I'll bet you next month's pay I can hit that kid. And they target practice on just innocent people. They would sharpen their swords for a good long time, get a good razor edge, and the next Mexican that walked by, they'd just take a chop at them, see how well it cut them. Were all the soldiers doing this? Not all of them, but a lot. Also remember, these Southerners were Protestants, primarily Southern Baptists. They hated Catholics. They felt like the Pope, they believed the Pope was the Antichrist, a servant of the devil. So they were desecrating Catholic churches, shrines to the Virgin Mary. They would, I'm going to put it exactly, no uncertain terms, guys, they would shit in their hands and wipe it on statues of Our Lady of Guadalupe, the Virgin of Guadalupe, which is the Mexican version of Mary, the mother of Christ. You say to yourself, these guys were Christians, and they did this to an image of the mother of Jesus? Well, because it was a Catholic image, a Catholic icon. They killed priests. They raped nuns. It was ugly stuff, guys. It was brutal, and it was ugly. If you've ever wondered why there's been a very difficult relationship between Mexico and the United States for such a long, long time, it started here. This is where the term gringo came from. Our soldiers often sang marching songs, and one of the songs that they sang was Green Grow the Rushes. The soldiers were going, Green Grow the Rushes, as they marched through Mexico. Somehow that gringo became gringo. Gringo. Pendejos. Cabrón de pinche gringos. That's where gringo came from. But getting back to the point. The Irish were very new to America. In other words, they weren't patriotic Americans whose fathers and grandfathers had been in the military. I just came from Ireland like 2 years ago, right? And I'm a good Catholic lad, I am. And these good Catholic Irish, when they saw what their fellow soldiers were doing to other Catholics, to innocent people, to nuns, to priests, to Catholic churches, Well, a bunch of them couldn't take it anymore, and they quit. They went AWOL. They deserted the American army, and they went over and they fought with the Mexicans. And the Mexicans called them the San Patricios, the St. Patricks. Now, once Mexico City was conquered and the war was over, the military was still there for months and months. They tried to hunt these guys down. And they did capture a lot of them. A lot of them, okay? Here's a painting by Samuel Chamberlain, The Hanging of the San Patricios. They hung 50 of these guys all on one day, on one giant structure that they made, right? To really, they court-martialed them. They gave them military trials. You deserted the military, right? You know, horrible stuff. But that's why you have this memorial, okay? This thing where Los Niños Heroes are, a memorial to, look at the names, Kerr Delaney, John MacDonald, Roger Quinn, John Bartley, Henry Whistier, John Little, John Murphy, right? I mean, these are Irishmen, okay? Irishmen that were remembered by Mexico, right? That fought for them, that stuck up for them. And to this day, sometimes down in central Mexico, just down around Mexico City where all that took place, you know, Mexicans, when they feel really good towards an American, in some way they'll say, hey, this guy's a real San Patricio, right? Like he's the right kind of American, not a gringo, a good guy. Anyway, okay guys, that's it for the Mexican-American War. I'll see you next time.